Welcome everyone to our pit stop at the Podium panel. My name is Eric Deng and I'm a product manager at Waymo working on vehicle behavior. This is a software that allows our driving technology, the Waymo Driver, to plan and execute its route from A to B in all of the areas that we operate. While researchers have dreamt of autonomous driving technology, or ADT, as early as the 1920s, the potential of this technology wasn't truly realized until the early 2000s when the US DARPA-funded projects such as the DARPA Grand Challenges, where teams of scrappy students from across the country proved that they could build and code a suite of technology to drive a car across the Mojave Desert autonomously. Since the conclusion of the challenge, the drive, excitement, and opportunities to get involved with ADT at the university level has dwindled in North America until recently with the advent of events such as Indy Autonomous Challenge and RoboRace. I'm delighted to be joined by two of the team leaders from the MIT, University of Pittsburgh, Rochester Institute of Technology, and Waterloo, or MIT-PITT-RW racing crew. Nayana is a current advisor and former co-captain for the MIT-PITT-RW team and previous president of the Pitt Robotics and Automation Society. Cindy, the co-captain of MIT-PITT-RW and captain of the MIT Driverless team, is also here joining us. Nayana, would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself and your work with the team?
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me. So a bit about me is I'm a recent computer engineering graduate from the computer engineering program at Pitt. As Eric mentioned, I'm the previous co-captain for the MIT-PITT-RW team. Really, a lot of my work over the past year on the team was leading us through our first two races, as well as coordinating different mergers between MIT and RIT and the University of Waterloo. And so upon my graduation, I'm currently working as a research assistant at CMU in the biorobotics lab, where a lot of my research focuses on multi-agent pathfinding. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Cindy, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and your background as well?
Of course. So I'm Cindy, and I'm one of the new co-captains of the MIT-PITT-RW team. I'm a first-year business student at MIT Sloan, and actually came to MIT because of the driverless team, and so I've had an interest in this space for a while. And after graduation next year, hoping to join the industry, but previously worked in investing, where I worked on a lot of the automotive tech, worked with a lot of automotive tech companies.
That's awesome. That's super, super exciting. And thank you both for joining me today. So maybe starting from the top, Cindy, can you tell me a little bit more about what autonomous racing is? What does it take to build a team? And maybe specifically in the context of kind of collegiate autonomous racing?
Yeah, of course. And so I think autonomous racing is similar to, I think, your typical motorsports competition, such as Formula One or the Indy 500. The track that you're racing on is exactly the same, and even the chassis of the vehicle that we have exactly the same. So we actually have an Indy Lights car that is the exact same one that is used in that development series race. And so I think the biggest and most obvious difference is just the lack of a human driver. For us, our team is working on just like the software stack that is essentially, the quote unquote human driver for us. And I think what makes autonomous racing kind of a unique thing is it allows us to, just get really creative now that you're removing the human from the equation, meaning you can kind of just push the limits of our hardware stack just, to crazy levels. And for many of us, I think one of the things that really brings us together, and I think also made it easier to just form a team, is that many of us are motorsports fans, but also just genuinely passionate about the autonomous vehicle industry. And so participating in, the Indy Autonomous Challenge, for example, just was such a great way to marry both interests.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview. And that makes sense, and that's super cool. One thing that I think kind of related to that people might observe is that this team is kind of across many different universities, which I think is quite interesting, like MIT, University of Pittsburgh. A lot of these schools are on the East Coast, but they're actually not that close to one another. How do these teams choose to team up? How do you select each other? How do you even build that relationship and get it off the ground?
Yeah, so I can take this one. The main way that MIT and Pitt sort of got together was for the India Autonomous Challenge. We really were incentivized to merge together because we had to actually purchase our competition vehicle. The MSRP price, I guess, of the car is around $1.2 million. But fortunately for us as the team, we only had to pay 300K. But still, it's a pretty large task for a group of students to fundraise. And so we figured, why not merge with another team and split the costs? And it seemed logical, at least for us, to merge with the MIT team initially because we're both student led. And at least by student led, what that means is essentially we have advisors that we go to for help, but really us as students, we're given the autonomy and the decision making power. And we control everything pretty much from the business all the way to the end of the technical. So it's been a really cool opportunity. But I guess going back to our team story, MIT and Pitt merged back in December of 2020. In May of 2021, we competed in the simulation race together. We placed fourth, which is pretty cool. And then shortly after, we realized we need more people to actually, like when we get the physical car, get it on the track and running. So we reached out to RIT and Waterloo to see if they wanted to merge with our team. And I guess since then, we've been working together as MIT-PITT-RW with all four schools for both the IEC races as well as Robo Race. And I think that overall, all our teams and all our schools, all our strengths really complement one another. So it's made the teaming process really easy and great. And yeah.
Wow, that's super awesome. Yeah, that's a great story. It hasn't even been that long, right? But it's impressive to see like how far you all have come already. I mean, obviously that's no small undertaking. Getting started seems very intimidating, and I think you talked about some numbers here, but quite expensive as well. Cindy, how do you recommend us get started in this field? Why do you think collegiate racing is well poised to drive the industry forward? And I think even your point about kind of you coming to MIT, right, partially at least being driven by like the existence of this program. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you think this has impacted you and might impact people in the future.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways that students can get involved in competitions like the India Autonomous Challenge. And so I think the first and foremost things students should do is, really take a look at the roster of some of these competitions. I think the benefit of both Robo Race and India Autonomous Challenge is that all the participants are university or college teams. And so you look at the roster and there's just a wide array of schools participating, both from domestic schools and also international schools. And, if your school isn't listed, then, one possibility is to reach out to one of the schools that is involved in the India Autonomous Challenge, for example. So I'll use our team, for example. I mean, our team isn't just limited to students from these four partner schools. We've had students reach out to us from UT Austin, UC Irvine, and a couple of local universities in the Boston area who, are just genuinely passionate about what we're doing and want to contribute. And for us, like that passion and like commitment is more than enough to just say, hey, why not join the team and work with us? And so we have a lot, we've started to have a growing number of students from universities outside of the four main schools. And the next level is to also just look at, smaller scale racing platforms. And so I think the most popular one tends to be the Formula 110 series, which tends to just be a smaller scale racing platform, but it's also just much more cost accessible because you look at the numbers that Nayana was quoting, I mean, 300K for a student team. I mean, it is a huge hurdle to kind of overcome. And we've been fortunate to, overcome that with support like companies like Waymo. But, if students are still wanting to jump in, Formula 110 is a great option and could be a great stepping stone to participating in the Indy Challenge. And I think, to your question around, just how collegiate racing can be a benefit of the industry or drive it forward, I think it's always important to kind of look at the history of motorsports and racing in the context of sort of like the automotive industry. And so you look at motorsports and just there's been a lot of innovations that have come from, these competitions. So like you have, I believe it's disc brakes, which came from Le Mans, and then you have the suspension systems, which originally came from Formula One. These are things I don't think we would really have today, or we would have probably gotten at some point later in the future if it weren't for motorsports. And so I think autonomous racing at the can do something similar for the autonomous vehicle space, and it also gives us the opportunity to really just explore problems that many companies haven't been able to explore yet, just because you can't travel at 180 miles per hour on your regular highway. And so just having these opportunities to really just push the limits of what's possible, I mean, I think you can get some pretty cool stuff coming from that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, like I think especially your point about like having different like access levels, and then also like leveraging existing kind of networks and people doing the work totally makes sense. And it's awesome to hear that you're working outside of the scope of the forward list on the team name. I guess one thing I actually wanted to follow up on in that kind of thread is technical learning and kind of leveraging more like off the shelf or existing open source projects, right? I think this is something that we see a lot in robotics. And to your point, like there's this kind of funneling of technologies and ideas from competitions, research, racing into like production automotive. But inversely, how do you all think about using and learning from like off the shelf open source systems or whatever's available more publicly? Maybe Nayana, do you have any thoughts, especially in the robotic space, on what's available and how you've learned from it?
Yeah, so I guess something about I guess with our team, like one of the biggest challenges was building a stack from the ground up in pretty much a year. Because our team was formed pretty much in January of 2021, and then we were racing October 2021. So really, we relied on very simple solutions. And like on your point about using open source software, like for instance, one example is our localization stack. We're using an off-the-shelf AKF package for our localization stack. And like at least for us, our focus was on like picking simple solutions that were robust, but focusing on the connections that were going on between them, so they work together in harmony. And honestly, it took us pretty far. So yeah.
That's awesome. And then when you're building those, like one of the things that I feel like with racing, and Cindy mentioned driving cars at 180 miles an hour, I think testing and roadwork testing is always going to be important, right? I was like when I was back in college, we didn't have a track on campus. Where and how do you test the vehicles? How do you test parts of the vehicles? Maybe tell us a little bit more about that, Nayana.
Yeah, so I guess the way we tested the vehicle was, at least when we had our first race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, we'd have a team out in Indianapolis full time during the summer as well as leading up to the race, and they'd pretty much be at the track. There was a local track called Lucas Oil Raceway that we tested, and we also had a handful of days at the IMS. And then fast forward to Vegas, we pretty much had like practice days every day at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. And so one of the great things is you get to go to these tracks and test on them. It's a pretty cool environment to test in because very rare opportunity. So it's been a fun time, but yeah, a lot of it is on-site testing. Yeah.
Super interesting. Yeah, I mean, related to all of your events, then, like, could you tell us a little bit more about the events that you've participated in over the last maybe 12 months, or even since like the inception of the team? We'd love to hear a little bit more about what you all have done and where you've gone with this work. Cindy.
Yeah, so I think our focus for the last 12 months has mostly actually been on the Indy Autonomous Challenge, just because, trying to develop like the software and then also, parallel trying to, fundraise a lot of the funds needed to be able to participate. I mean, just to give some context, like one track or practice day at, Las Vegas Motor Speedway is, in the 5 digits just to book it for a day. And so there was a lot of work to, actually not just have our, software, be set and ready, but also making sure that like we can actually, get to race day. And so our focus for the last 12 months and even just for the next 12 months will continue to be in the Indy Autonomous Challenge, just because there's a lot of, operations and planning and just logistics that we need to plan, in addition to a lot of the milestones that we need to hit on the software side.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously there's like kind of competitive aspects of like the India Autonomous Challenge, but one thing that I think we've chatted about previously is almost like more important is like building a good experience and fostering interest within your team, within the larger community. Maybe, Nayana, can you tell me a little bit more about how you think about this. Like, what are the things that worked in the past as you go to these events or prep for these events?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think one of the biggest things that was a big focus, at least during my time as GM, was placing an emphasis on building a good culture. Because realistically, when you go through 3 different mergers in the span of a year, I guess I wanted people to think of our team as the MIT-PITT-RW team, not the MIT team or the Pitt team, or I guess, etc. And so the way we did that mainly was by having events where the team was a mix of fun as well as work. And so, I guess to give more context and really drive the point home, because we're a student led team, our team is made up of volunteers. Everybody's doing this in their free time. And so, we had to really place an emphasis on rounding out that culture so people sort of stayed on the team and wanted to contribute outside of their intrinsic motivation behind working on the cool problem that we're doing. And so, yeah, a lot of like events. So we did a bunch of career development events with resume reviews, LinkedIn stuff, etc. Had a lot of social events, team dinners, etc. And then even in Vegas and like Indy, we did a lot of fun activities. Like in Vegas, we went go karting. And then I think another thing that really helped was our meetings are really collaborative across the team. At one point, especially in Indianapolis and Vegas, we had our team spread across 5 different locations, and it turned into a fun challenge to sort of figure out how do you manage over people in 5 different places, nonetheless virtually. And so I guess a big like during our one meeting, for instance, our shop day, which occur on Saturdays. Essentially, the goal is to one, go through our priorities for the next week, as well as work together on different problems and tasks that we have as a team. And I think that by having this structured time, we work collaborative as a team. It made it such that when we were in person, it didn't feel like anything changed. It felt like we knew each other our entire lives. So yeah, big. I guess to summarize, big emphasis on culture and rounding out that community, so you can build a community of people that have shared goals and visions. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Cindy, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just gonna add that I think Nayana has done an incredible job in just making the team what it is today. I mean, I joined the team, I want to say in June, and I've only, I guess up until Las Vegas, had only really met the team virtually and like, in these Zoom meetings. And when it came down to like flying to Vegas, like it actually did feel like I had known everyone for a very long time. Like the chemistry was there, like the familiarity was there, and it just made being like a participating in the competition just much more enjoyable. And so now that I'm kind of just I've kind of taken over for Andrew, who used to be the co-captain, and like my focus is just going to be making sure that there does continue to be this balance of like fun and work, especially as we start heading into more and more competitions where a lot of the requirements just become increasingly more demanding. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, kudos to Nayana for making the team what it is today.
No, that's great. And yeah, I think one of the things that like we think about a lot also is just like making sure we're building a great team with a great culture, right? And like the tech is cool, the problems are cool, but the people are super important. And like I think it's awesome that you're kind of very proactively and very kind of intentionally curating this. And shop days, love the idea, and like actually love the naming too. So like we might try and borrow that for a little bit. We'll see. Kind of related to that, though, one thing that you'd mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting is the team itself is distributed, right? Which like obviously introduces its own challenges, but you have a lot of these like practices and almost like kind of cultural habits that your team probably does now. How does the interaction with like other teams at these events look like? I think everyone faces these structural challenges more or less, right? Like, do you collaborate with other teams? How does the overall community grow together? Maybe tell me a little bit more about that and your experience thus far. Maybe Nayana first.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess really getting those cars across the finish line has been a collaborative effort. Back in May of 2021, when we first got our vehicles, really the first stack to run on the car was a collaborative stack that was run by all the teams. And so really during that summer leading up to like September, October, we really worked together. Even though we were all competing against one another, we worked together on making that first stack on the vehicle that let the vehicle go like 30 to 40 miles per hour. And so that was really great opportunity. And I think that sort of collaboration sort of sustained, even though we've been, I guess, at like against one another for like all these competitions where like, for instance, if we're running into an issue with our car, probably another teams run into it. Like, we'll go to their tent and be like, hey, we're into this issue, and they'll come over and help us out. So overall, it's really built, even though we're like against one another in the competition, it's really built a community of people who are all focused around the same vision and I guess idea of just really like pushing the industry forward. So yeah.
Awesome. Cindy, any thoughts on collaborating with other teams?
No, I think I echo a lot of the points Nayana mentioned. I mean, I can think of one example after Las Vegas where people were sharing a lot of the, camera footage and a lot of these data feeds to kind of just, for everyone to test a lot of their models on. And so it just speaks to a lot of the, we're competing against one another, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we can support one another so that as a whole, like we're all better off for the next competition.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that totally makes sense, and it's great to hear that the community is kind of thriving as a whole. Speaking of community, though, like one other community that I guess you all are part of, at least 4 other communities, which is like the individual universities and the schools, right? So I think one thing that you mentioned that I think is super cool is the fact that it's pretty much focused on like undergrad and students. Everyone is kind of volunteering as a part of their engagement with the group. That's great. How do you think about growing engagement within individual universities and like those communities? And what are the things that you think have worked the best? What are the things that maybe didn't work so well when you think about like growing awareness and growing engagement within these respective universities? Maybe
I guess I can go
Nayana.
first. Yeah. So I guess to provide more context, I guess like I mentioned before, I recently graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, and despite Pittsburgh being in the or University of Pittsburgh being in the Pittsburgh area, there aren't really many opportunities for students to explore robotics at Pitt. And so really our club, the Pitt Robotics and Automation Society, has been a way for people to form their community to explore robotics because I guess the traditional routes aren't really that accessible to a lot of people. And I guess there isn't one path to get involved. And so sort of providing this accessible opportunity has been a big part. And even within our school and our club, there's a big focus on mentorship. So like, for instance, one of my other co-founders on my team's name is Andrew Saba, and he's been probably one of my mentors for the past, and like best friends for like a few years. And like, it's been great to sort of watch both my own personal growth as well as the growth that I see in other people, because you give them the autonomy and the ownership to really rise up to like, I guess, all the stuff they're doing as a team. I think the level of ownership that we're able to give students allows themselves to elevate themselves to a position that they normally wouldn't, I guess, have until like further along in their career. So I think that like brings up a lot of motivation and incentive for people where you could drive a lot of progress and work out of them.
Yeah, and from a confidence building standpoint, I think the autonomous vehicle space is one of those in which there's a lot of intimidation, as in people kind of hold off on, jumping in just because a lot of the problems and the challenges that you're working with, they are difficult. But I think one of the things that we do try to do as a team is just, give people the opportunity to get a lot of that hands-on experience and, slowly build that confidence. And so, if this is something that they really want to do, like, after graduation, they can go into these industries. And we have a lot of, students that are alumni for our team, a lot of the companies that are just like, taking the challenge head on and, doing really well. And a lot of them really credit their experience on the team as just being a big driver, no pun intended, of, jumping in.
No, that's great. That's awesome. Cool. Yeah, that sounds like the community is growing, interest is growing, and I think it seems like a very healthy, kind of sustainable growth path. So that's awesome to hear. Maybe pivoting a little bit, I think more into like the like autonomous vehicle or even like just racing side of things. Watching high-speed motorsports such as IndyCar, NASCAR, Formula One is a beloved pastime around the world. It's been critical to pushing the limits of automotive technology, as you mentioned, Cindy. Cindy, I know you're a big F1 fan. I'm a big F1 fan. What should racing fans be excited about and tune in for autonomous racing?
Yeah, so I think there's often this comment where, some people tend to think that this is going to eventually replace Formula One or Indy 500. I'm kind of in the camp that it won't, because I think, similar to you, like I'm sure, we're both watching Formula One and, we're following certain teams because of the people themselves. Like you're not following the Mercedes or Red Bull team because, oh, they have like amazing vehicles. No, you're following you're following Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton. And so I think autonomous racing won't be a replacement as much as it'll just be like a unique sport in itself. And so I think the best way to kind of think about it is maybe just Formula One meets battle bots, where it's almost like this, you kind of go head to head and there's a lot of chaos. And, because you don't have, again, like the human driver, there's a lot more you can do in terms of just, say, for example, like obstacle courses, or maybe having one day a race where you have these autonomous vehicles racing around, but then the audience, is able to engage and like, maybe just, I don't know, have more, what do you call it? Like they're able to sort of say like, oh, I'm just going to race like this obstacle in the middle of the track and then see how they react. I think it'll definitely be a sport of its own. But yeah, I definitely don't think it'll be a replacement for Formula One or Indy 500.
Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah, that's super interesting, the BattleBot plus racing aspect and like the doors it opens. I guess like one kind of follow on to that is, I mean, even during the pandemic, right? Like the Formula One racers pivoted to like sim racing for a while. Like, what do you think about like where does sim racing sit in your mind between maybe Formula One, like autonomous IndyCar, that type of stuff? Like, what are your thoughts on how these
Yeah.
all of these kind of exist together? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the first thing that comes to mind is I think if you're in a simulation race and, say you're racing a ghost car, for example, I mean, I think you could use, these technologies for that. But I think the only thing I would worry about is I think an autonomous vehicle itself is probably more willing and able to take a higher level of risk that a human driver, I think, wouldn't be able to take in real life. I think it could be a good tool to kind of just test out different scenarios and just different strategies in a simulation environment, but I'm not entirely sure how they might translate to the real world, just because by just an autonomous vehicle itself can just take an amount of risk that I think for a human it would not be ideal.
Totally. Makes sense. I guess related to racing, maybe just to summarize, the last year you competed in a few of these series. Can you tell us a little bit more about like what you learned from this last season, how you plan on applying it? I think there's a lot of content here probably that I'm really excited to dig into, but maybe you can, Cindy, you can start with like an overview of what this last year was like.
Yeah, so I think this year there was a lot of lessons learned, and I think what's helpful is just a little bit of context. I was on the business operations side of the team, meaning I was, responsible for doing a lot of the sponsorship and the partnership with a lot of the companies that we have, supporting us. And one of the things that I think was very surprising for the team, and I think we're more mindful of, is just how expensive just participation can be. I mean, just thinking about, getting testing and development days on the track, like those are things that I think we're going to be planning a lot better for, just because it's, you're only like the more days you can have on track, the better, because then you can kind of just see, how your vehicle is performing. And if you run into any issues, then okay, you have the freedom of just, using up other days to kind of just like refine and, and iterate. But I'll probably turn to Nayana to kind of lean on more of the technical side.
Yeah, so I guess on the technical side, I touched upon this before, but I think a lesson learned was how far simple can take you. Because, like I said before, really our objective as a team was to build a baseline stack, like a good foundation that we could then build off of for future races. And part of that was choosing simple solutions and sort of being surprised with how far they could take us. Like, for instance, our localization stack, like I mentioned before, is an EKF, open source EKF package. And our control stack is an LQR controller. So nothing like big, flashy, but simple took us really far and led us to go like 135 miles per hour on the track. And so really just, yeah, focusing on how those pieces put together, like form one big system. And like, that's the biggest lesson I think I've learned. And now I think it's built a great foundation that we can use for future competitions. Yeah.
Awesome. That's super interesting. I think like there's a few takeaways I'm like hearing here that I want to follow up on a little bit more. I was like, number one, Cindy, you mentioned like in your opening response that like you were focused more on the business and like operation side of things. Like obviously building a car is not just the engineering components, not just like putting together all of the hardware and software. There's a lot of other things that go on behind the scenes that allow like a team to operate, right? Can you tell me maybe a little bit more about like what are the dimensions of work there, and then also maybe expand on how people who maybe don't come from hardware software engineering backgrounds can get involved and actually directly impact like the outcome of teams maybe in these other roles?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think if I were to kind of think about where I spent a lot of my time on was really on that sponsorships and fundraising side of it. And so, one of the things that, both Nayana and I have mentioned is, you have like the vehicle that, costs like around 300 grand. And then you have all these other costs that kind of come with, well, gotta rent some truck time, gotta fly over the team and provide housing and provide as much support as you can so that we're able to, get to race day and cross the finish line. And so a lot of that, for us, the money has to come from somewhere. And so, part of what the business operations team does is, really conduct a lot of outreach with companies and, really show the story of what our team has been doing and then seeing if, maybe they want to join along for the ride as well. And we've been fortunate to have found a lot of support. And I think, that's allowed us to sort of keep, charging forward and even just, continue to participate in the Indie Challenge. But for students who, may not be entirely confident in their technical skills or may not even have that background, I mean, there's a series of roles such as sponsorships, there's marketing, social media, there's also logistics. So figuring out, how do you sort of start planning for travel and then even just like moving the vehicle around and transporting it and like we have students from business backgrounds in a lot of these roles, but we're also open to more technical students who may want to sort of learn more of these like business and softer skills that we have on our team as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities for the team. I think, well, while we're primarily an engineering first and, mostly engineering team, we do need a lot of these like key roles to make sure that, we're getting to a lot of our goals.
Awesome. I mean, I guess building on top of that, Nayana, more from like the engineering technical side, like what are things that I think you maybe surprised you or you think have worked really well when it comes to like partnerships with your kind of operations, business, sales, marketing counterparts within the team, and maybe tell us a little bit more about like how critical you felt that collaboration has been for like the engineering side to really be able to execute and deliver.
Yeah. So I guess like at least my background is pretty technical, but when I was like in the co-captain role, I really got to go on the other side of the table and learn how hard it is and also how rewarding it is to be on the business side of things. Like I think that like I guess as an engineer, I don't think you realize how much I guess goes on the business side to really get all those pieces together to support a team. And in that role, I was able to learn about everything from sponsorships to marketing to finances, fundraising, etc. And I think really overall, like the biggest thing I learned is how much communication skills it takes. And I think that's something that's like important, especially for engineers to know. Like I think the biggest skill probably that I learned over the past year was how do you take something highly technical as a race car and a race car stack and explain it to pretty much anybody, and also convince them to invest in you and your team and to believe in your vision. So yeah, couldn't do anything we do without the business team.
That's great. And yeah, totally agreed on the communication part, right? It's like you can build the best car in the world, but unless you can quickly describe it to some people, like some people, it's just going to take more effort, and it's way more important than I think sometimes engineers might think. Related to that though, like on the foundations point, like I think you've done a great job as far as like really explaining how like complexity of the systems might be abstracted, what off-the-shelf systems you're kind of interested in using to keep the solution a little bit more simple. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you and the team have thought about like foundational investments in technology versus and like kind of taking off-the-shelf open source solutions versus like building your own? I think going through that process and like what it's like within your organization, I think could be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think at least for us, a big focus was, I guess, assessing like what sort of solutions are commonly accepted in the field, and then figuring out, okay, what's out there in terms of open source to save us the work. I mean, we could probably write our own AKF, but I mean, open source makes it a lot easier. And I mean, the OQR controller that we have for our car was actually written by one of our members, but it's pretty textbook. So I guess the way we approach it is by evaluating what's currently out there and then seeing like what's the value in terms of time that it takes to develop versus using the package and seeing, okay, like what's the like value add versus time spent to develop. And by saving time here, does it save us time in developing some of those other aspects of our stack that are maybe more novel or unique? So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Also, okay, you have the technical foundations. You have like this very healthy like business ops team. Why is MIT-PITT-RW? Why is this team prepared for the upcoming season? What are you most excited about? Maybe Cindy first.
Yeah. So I think there's been, and we've touched on this before, there's been a lot of just takeaways that we've walked and lessons learned from like the last two races that I feel like have given us just more to work in terms of just planning for the next two races. And so definitely feel like we're a lot more prepared given these lessons learned. And I think one of the things that we've started doing is, it kind of goes back to that communication piece, is just trying to, make sure that that information flow, keeps going and that people kind of know where everyone is up to, at the same time keeping that balance where it's like, okay, people have other things going on, with school, work, life, just being mindful of that. And I think one of the benefits that we have now too, as we think about the next race, is we have a lot more time to work with, which, for us, given that, we're entirely made up of, student volunteers, provides just more, wiggle room in terms of planning and developing our stack. Nayana, I'm not sure if you want to add.
Yeah, I think Cindy hit it on the nail on the head. I guess the biggest part that I would say is just time to like really reflect and refine on like our experience for the past season. I guess to expand on that point, for our competition for IEC 1.0, which was back in October, we got our car like as a team at PITT-RW like a good 6 weeks before the competition, and then 2 months later had Vegas, and so 2 months to go. And like for more context, the competition in Vegas was two vehicles, while the one in Indianapolis was one vehicle. So it was a pretty tall order taking it from one vehicle to two vehicles in the span of 2 months. And I think that, especially because there's a bit of time before the next races, it's really given us an opportunity to sort of learn from our mistakes, iterate, and become better. So we're even more prepared and do better at the next races.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm excited to follow the team and see what this next year holds. So, we're about to transition to the audience question portion of this, but like before we do that, Cindy, just like a really quick, fun hypothetical. So, if the autonomous driver was put into racing today, like let's just say like wheel-to-wheel racing against professional human driver, who do you think would win?
Oof. As much as I would love to say our car, I think given, where we are in sort of like the development process, I think a human driver like Lewis Hamilton would, beat us easily. I think it's the biggest comparison I would probably make is, just the development of Watson and its eventual, I guess, beating of like the world chess champion. I mean, it wasn't something that was done overnight. And I'm sure, in the early stages, it probably wouldn't have been able to come close to beating a chess grandmaster. But I think maybe in 5 or 10 years, maybe it'll be a different story. But today, probably not. I think I would bet my money on Lewis Hamilton.
We'll give it a few years. That sounds good. Cool. So with that, let's open it up for questions from the audience. So we've have some pre-submitted questions, so we'll start there. Let's see. The first one for Cindy. You've had the unique experience of working in finance, robotics, a bunch of different contexts, a bunch of different industries. What are some of your biggest learnings about investing in automotive companies while working in investment management, and maybe how has that helped you or kind of helped you contextualize your work with MIT PITT-RW team?
Of course, and that's a great question. I think where a lot of that value has really shown up is really on the business operations side. So, one of the things that I had access to back when I was working at, my mutual fund is just the access to C-suite teams. And so, coming into this team, I kind of knew some of the individuals that I knew would be like really interested in racing. And so, it helped a lot on the sponsorship side. But I think just broadly, I've always had an interest in just the autonomous vehicle industry. And like even since undergrad, and I wasn't an engineering student, but I felt like maybe finance was just another way to explore it, and through that investing. And I think for me, it's given me a high level view of like what are we seeing in the industry, what's working, what isn't, and I think it's helped me kind of just think more bigger picture, and like the involvement with this team has kind of just helped me kind of nurture and grow that interest, but also really affirm that like, hey, this is something I really want to do. Like, I think the technology is absolutely amazing, and you could probably do a lot of stuff. And autonomous racing, well, I don't believe anyone else is doing it at the commercial level yet. It just felt like a great way to just explore a different use case. But I think there's been a lot of complementary skills that I've been able to sort of just apply to this team just from working in finance and investing.
Awesome. That makes sense and seems to be working. So that's great to see. Cool. Second question. For Nayana, can you tell us a little bit more about you and your team's approach to creating an autonomous driving stack?
Yeah. So I guess just reiterating points from before, just leaning on existing solutions to sort of figure out like how far it can take us. I think big lesson we learned was, especially from having this baseline that we developed, was seeing limitations of like what are the currently accepted solutions in the field, and seeing limitations that exist. And so at least looking ahead to the next year, it's really given us an opportunity to pick and like sort of explore more interesting problems in terms of the different gaps that we see in how current tech in the field operates at these high speeds. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So our last question, how should parents, educators, mentors in this space encourage their students to get involved? How do they find these opportunities? Any strategies for like reaching out and like making sure they can actually join the team or start to contribute? Maybe for both of you, Cindy, you can start.
Yeah, I think general advice for, if we're assuming that students refers to college level students, and I mean, first step would be to feel free to just get in touch with us. Like I mentioned earlier, our team, isn't just limited to MIT, Pitt, Rochester, and Waterloo students. I think if there's a genuine interest and just motivation to contribute and like being able to learn as much as you can, and I know Nayana has a great story about two individuals that joined the team, not knowing how to work a lidar sensor, who eventually became the perception leads. We're more than willing to take the students in, and so we're always happy to chat. But Nayana, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I guess I guess I can talk about my journey and then go from there. So the way I got involved in robotics was getting involved in first robotics competitions, pretty much from fourth grade all the way to my senior year of high school. So like participating in these programs, which I feel very fortunate to have had an early exposure, really gave me an opportunity to see, okay, this is what I guess robotics may look like, and like I like these sorts of problems, and this is the kind of problems that I want to work on in the future. And so I guess on that aspect of like just a lot of exposure. And like I think that's the key thing, just having a lot of exposure so you know what you like and don't like. Especially in like my role and I now as the general manager, despite not being in a highly technical role, it still taught me a lot in terms of I would like to do this in my future, or I maybe might not like this aspect of the job and might not want to do that. And I guess speaking as like college students, especially when you first enter college, I was really interested in getting involved in robotics, but didn't know how. And so I would just say seeking out opportunities around you. One way I did that was pretty much sending an email to my professor at CMU and saying, "Hey, I'm really interested. I'd like to work." And luckily, he took me on. And so I think a big part of it is one, just not being afraid to reach out and seek out resources to help with your personal development, and two, just exposing yourself to as many things as possible.
Awesome. That totally makes sense. Really quick, do you mind telling that like story that Cindy
Yeah.
referred to, or like do you have like a quick 30 second?
Yeah. So I guess on our team, our two perception leads, their names are Adam and Noah, or our previous perception leads. They started on the team around a year ago. They didn't know what PyTorch was or any, I guess, sort of CV things, but really a big part of their development over the past year was rounding out the materials and resources. So someone started from that point to go to writing all the camera and LiDAR perception algorithms in the car. And so I guess talking to Cindy's point, it's been really great to watch that process in terms of seeing someone's growth over such a short period of like 6 months, 12 months, etc. And like even though they started from that point a year ago, now they are like key contributors and drivers for like both the LiDAR and camera algorithms in the car. And so it's been a really rewarding process overall. Yeah.
That's awesome. And sorry, one last question from Shreya 700. What are the biggest challenges, maybe technical ones, at the moment in the automotive industry, like based on your experience and like insights thus far?
I guess I can take that one. I think the
Yeah.
biggest one is speed. Like things get so complicated the faster you go. And I guess at least like talking from our personal experience, we had a run at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway where we went like 141 miles per hour. But then as we were turning around the corner, we spun out. Luckily, avoided the wall, but we spun out nonetheless. And the reason why was because our tires weren't warm enough. And so I guess it's one of the lessons that like when you're going at those higher speeds, all these little things you normally don't think about start to add up and affect your performance. Where you're really trying to optimize to see how far you can push that car. And so, yeah, that's like I think one of the coolest challenges with I guess this project and autonomous racing, especially.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And if it's the kind of pattern that Cindy was describing earlier, right, of like you can start doing things with autonomous racing that maybe is less practical with human drivers. Cool. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. Nayana, Cindy, thank you both so much for joining us today. As we wrap up, anything you want to share? Any topics that you think are particularly interesting on the highlight? Maybe we'll start with Cindy.
I think we covered a good chunk of it, but I think if there's one thing to kind of just take away is, if there's an interest in, wanting to participate in this space, it's, just go for it, reach out to folks. As I mentioned, looking into the resources that some of your own schools have, as well as, consider us just a resource as well. We'd be more than happy to chat. Because I feel like it's an industry that's very exciting and often feels a little inaccessible, but there are resources out there, and if anyone's interested, yeah, please reach out.
I think like ditto
Awesome.
to Cindy's point, echoing all that she said, but also like I think just in terms of my biggest takeaway was just not being afraid to go into the unknown. When I first started our team, I gave my advisor approaching about starting the team, and I gave him a very firm no, and he eventually convinced me by saying, "What's the worst that can happen?" And I think that's something that I take with me, especially now, is like, "What's the worst that can happen?" and sort of taking that away. And so I think it's been a really great experience. Like being on the team and being able to, I guess, sort of drive it forward. And yeah, really happy that we got to share our team story and our own stories on this panel.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you again for coming. That's awesome. We're very excited to like have you here, have everyone in the audience showing up today. Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was super interesting how you all are thinking about building cars, building teams, and even in like the a little bit over a year that you've been doing this, it's really impressive to see like the kind of traction and progress you all have made. I think I can speak for everyone here that we wish you and your team the best of luck in this upcoming season. We'll keep ourselves updated and follow you along your journey. Really excited to see what comes next, and can't wait to see what you guys all accomplish. So thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Same. Thank you so much.